two, one, go. The most damaging lie in a relationship isn't always what we say, it's what we choose not to say and hide away. As the prime minister of this debate, I will do two things in my speech. Firstly, I'll provide some characterization for this motion, and secondly, I will explain the lawyer's reasoning for the two arguments from our side. So, firstly, starting with the characterization. In the status quo, most of these white lies are given when one in a relationship does not want to speak the harsh reality to the other to make sure or guess that they don't want to harm their feelings. This looks like, for example, lying to your parents when it's not truly what you think when they're lecturing you. However, we believe that these decisions and lies are made and think in the short term. However, they are not thinking in the long-term damage that is created on these relationships. Secondly, what would we believe that giving this radical honesty and truth look like? We believe that this radical honesty does not have to be something that is really serious or upsetting for the relationship. You don't have to get extremely angry to tell a lie. For example, if you don't agree with something your parent says, you can say, I understand or I agree that with what you said, but I also think that, and just say what you think. We believe that it also comes with constructive feedback because obviously something needs to change for this relationship to develop and move on. So finally, what are some premises that has to be established in this debate? Firstly, we believe that relationships that are going to break up over the actual truth are unstable and unhealthy ones to begin with. For example, if one person in a romantic relationship does not want to accept constructive criticism from their partner and get annoyed, that is an unhealthy relationship to begin with. Secondly, in a healthy relationships, both sides are willing to open up and listen to what others have to say about them and their actions. For example, in romantic relationships, if you don't like a gift, you don't have to say immediately, I hate this entirely. You can say, I appreciate you for thinking thoughtfully for this gift, but I wish that you could think, but I would appreciate it more if you got this for me instead. Now, there are two paths which will happen under this premise. Firstly, they might overreact and just shut you off. However, that relationship is not worth having as it is unstable to begin with. And the other path is that where it is a healthy relationship, where they are willing to change, that is when it can become even more stronger and sturdy, which I will now explain in my two arguments. So the first argument that our side would like to present in this debate is that radical honesty creates more clarity and trust, while just staying silent about it or lying creates more confusion and emotional instability. So what is the first layer to this argument? When there's this communication gap, when someone's actions bothers you, but you don't care or like you don't want to communicate it to them, the problem doesn't just disappear, it just becomes invisible. Because when the other person continues the behavior that you don't like, they genuinely believe that it's fine that they're doing it. But from their perspective, there has been like no signal from you that change is needed because of your words. Now, this creates these like mismatched signals where over time the person who is annoyed will be starting to act more irritated or distant because this mismatch of when your behavior signals that you're irritated or angered, but your words still say that nothing's wrong just because you want to please them, the other person is rather left more confused and emotionally destabilized. So the third layer to this is that this feels unfair because the other person now is treated more like a pet peeve for something that they were never told is a problem. They might be blamed or judged by rejected without clearly understanding why. But radical honesty actually restores this fairness by ensuring that everyone has access to the same emotional information that can lead the relationship to change for the better. So the final layer to this is that we believe that trust in this debate depends on predictability and transparency, not just false comfort. Because when people know that you will tell them honestly if something is wrong, they feel safer with more security and not attacked when you tell them over time in the distant future. We believe that this radical honesty aligns with your feelings and words and actions into a more consistent message which won't send mixed signals. So, what is the final impact of this? We believe that when there's fewer misunderstandings, there's less emotional guesswork to do, which will lead each side to be more emotionally stable with the relationship and will have stronger trust because these expectations and boundaries are clear, which my second speaker will later extend on. Now, what is our second argument in this debate? We believe that when you hold back these negative feelings, this only escalates the conflict and damages the relationship in the long term. The first layer to this is that these negative feelings do not just fade away because they're simply unspoken. We believe that this ignored issue will only add even more emotional weight, even if the behavior itself is not that long, because over time, as it accumulates, the issue is only going to become larger. The silence which turns from like a minor annoyance into a more long-term resentment towards the other side. Now, the second layer to this is that when these emotions are suppressed, they just don't stay contained forever and ever. They leak out as like perhaps sarcasm or just passive aggression or emotional withdrawal or just simply you being irritable, because these behaviors hurt more than honesty because they feel more personal and unexplained, and you just in yourself you feel like this might be causing some issues. Now, the third layer to this is that this might cause some sudden escalations because sometimes a small trigger might cause some emotional explosion because you are balling it in for way too long. The other person might be really shocked or upset because now the reaction feels completely proportionate to like what you were acting like before. So what could have been solved early on and not turned into a major issue now just feels like a more of like a crisis. So the last layer to this is that when this radical honesty can't fix from this, we believe that radical honesty actually addresses the problem at the smallest and least emotional stage in the beginning instead of waiting for it to finally explode out. We believe that these early conversations are going to be a lot more calmer and clearer and easier to resolve. And if the other side does break down and feel really offended that you said it, we believe that that relationship is not worth having because you're communicating in a more constructive way. We believe that this prevents more dramatic confrontations and relationship breakdowns, and that is what keeps a relationship healthy to begin with. Now, what is the final impact from our side? We believe that these more stable relationships have fewer emotional blowups, which will lead to conflicts being resolved through dialogue rather than just emotional damage or the relationship ending in the end. So therefore, we believe that when people actually communicate through actual honesty and transparency, that is when the emotions can be let out in the short term instead of waiting for it to explode in the long term. So for all the reasons, please give the ballot to Gov.
This debate isn't about whether it is good to be honest generally, it's about whether it is good for you to be honest in every circumstance. Firstly, I'll do my rebuttal and then I'll move on to two pieces of substantive. The opposition comes out and talks about, oh, in the long term, relationships will be more healthy. Well, I'd like to point out that maybe some people don't want to tell something to their parents or to their friends right now. Maybe they don't feel emotionally capable. Maybe they don't feel emotionally ready to burden them with information or to make them and drag them down with them. Perhaps they want to tell them later, or perhaps children are going to be burdened with this. They talk about how relationships are, if they're not truthful, are bad. I'd like to give them an example. Your wife has postpartum depression and is struggling desperately. She needs a confidence boost and you want to support her. Do you, under our side, tell her that she looks good and that you love her and that everything will be all right? Or are you going to be brutally honest? Are you going to tell her that, oh, no, I think you're being a burden on me right now. Oh, I think you're dragging me down. Or, oh, I don't think you look good in that dress. The fact is, this debate isn't coming down to whether or not, telling lies or saying that, oh, I had an extra hamburger in the drive-thru today and we're meant to be dieting. No, it's about to the real problems. When people are, for example, trans and growing up in conservative communities in rural Alabama and still want to maintain a working relationship with their parents, their community, and their support groups. It is the fact that it is not these minor sort of situational things in relationships or little tidbits. It's about these major sort of issues. For example, a mother not wanting to tell her children that she has cancer. They also come out and they talk about how there's like security. And I'd like to just say that in a relationship, I wouldn't want to be judged 24/7. We know that humans in general are very judgy people. We have thoughts all the time going, oh, that shirt looks hideous. But it isn't the place for you to constantly have to berate people. And that is what will happen in this. No, I will not take the point. So firstly, my first substantive is it creates unnecessary emotional burden for individuals. So my thesis to this point is white lies are good to boost confidence and nurture people into success, giving them the motivation to be able to put forth their best self. Imagine if a young painter, their parents told them, oh, I do not think you're a good painter, and that child doesn't grow up to be a famously successful artist because they told that little child, they put down their feelings, they were brutally honest, they were radically honest, and they said, I don't think you're a good painter. Now that child doesn't have the motivation to proceed, they don't feel like they're supported, and they feel like that they are behind in life. We will lose generations of artists and great thinkers due to this brutal or radical honesty. The question you must ask yourself in this debate is not whether the truth is good, but whether the truth above all else, feelings, emotions, and mindset is better than the truth guided by more context, more restraint, and being naturally a person with empathy. Emotional burden on people you love. For example, if a dying mother with cancer seeks not to tell her children so as not to burden the 5 or 6 year olds with the fact that she has only months to live or months left to live. or a struggling father who is broke, whether he should burden his children with the fact that he can barely put food on the table, whether he should burden his friends saying that, oh, he is struggling to make ends meet and to burden them. Perhaps he wants to uphold his pride with his friends. Perhaps he doesn't want to burden his children with the fact that he is struggling to make ends meet. Perhaps he wants to raise and nurture his children with happy and healthy childhoods. I will not take the POI. So the truth, whilst being principally good, should not outweigh the burden of impact that it can provide. So now onto my second substantive, which is secondly, that lying is necessary to escape oppressive circumstances. Imagine growing up trans in a community in rural Alabama or Arkansas or the US Deep South, a famously conservative region, and your parents not having a true understanding of this. To protect yourself, it is necessary sometimes to lie, to push off these things, and not to tell them at the age of 12 that you feel like you're a woman trapped in a man's body, because maybe at that point in time, they just won't understand. Perhaps it is that you need to wait 10 years to feel comfortable to tell them, or to feel like when they'll understand. Perhaps it is not your moment in time. Being radically honest means that you will say things or against your will, against what you want, or against what you feel comfortable with. The key basis on empathy and the key basis in all of this is that you are able to be given the choice, and that is what side affirmative takes away in this debate. I open the floor up to any points of inquiry.
Yeah, okay. Okay. So given that I've already stated in my speech that sometimes words and actions they contradict with each other, don't you think that creates even more emotional distress?
I think what creates more emotional distress is a mother dying of cancer telling her children that she only has months to live, and now they must weigh up every decision, every conversation they have with her, instead of being able to value the time left with them. I think that more emotionally impactful or more emotionally difficult on struggling families is now telling their children that, oh, they're not going to get the happy childhood of being able to be oblivious and being able to focus on growing up as a child. Instead, now they're going to be worrying about their parents' financial stress because their parents have been radically honest. I think what is most misunderstood in this debate is the fact that it is not whether it is good to be honest generally, but it is being honest in every single circumstance. The problem is here, we do not reject that honesty is good. There is honesty on our side, but instead what is fundamentally different is people have the right to choose. When the fact is that you feel like, and you have to tell every single minute detail of your life, to your relationships, to your family, to your friends, and your broader community, you can lose key support groups and you can burden people. For example, maybe some people don't want to reveal that they're dying of cancer. I mean, I can give an example. Remember in Breaking Bad, Walter White, at the very start, he didn't want to talk about how he had lung cancer because he didn't want to burden the people around him, because he was going through financial stress. It is very understandable to understand the emotional situations where people are going through and as to why they might want to protect themselves. Lying is necessary to escape certain circumstances, and not just because it is principally good to sometimes tell the truth, but as a community, I do not think in any way to constantly have to tell the truth would instead just create a community whereby you constantly feel judged. You don't feel like you're ever in a safe space. The opposition has come out and they've essentially talked about how, oh yes, it'll be a healthy relationship. You'll be very honest with each other. You'll be able to discuss things freely. Well, that is just not the case, because once you tell them every minute detail of your life, you'll feel like you have nothing left. You feel like you have no choice and that you have no path that you get to decide. I strongly negate for the opposition. Thank you.
2, 1. Communication is key in relationships, and only with radical honesty can we assure that. In my speech, first, I'll be giving a few rebuttals to our opponents, and then I'll be adding more onto my teammates' point about how the only way to build a long-term healthy relationship is to have radical honesty, and adding more onto the impacts of the situation and illustrating the situation more. So first, I'll be starting with rebuttals. Our opponents have argued that people may not ready to tell them some part of themselves, but that is true. But the issue that we are addressing is that sometimes these people never become ready, and that is why this debate exists. When they never become ready, that is when the truth becomes a lie. Only when you are honest about what's going on will the issue actually have a chance at being solved. Many people never be honest about a part of themselves, and that's what leads to misunderstandings and conflicts. I'll illustrate this more later in my speech. They've also talked about how dads a dad not being able to afford food on the table, so to keep his pride, he wouldn't tell his children or coworkers. But our opponents believe that ignoring the issue will solve it, but it won't. They believe we should just leave everyone in the dark instead of easing them into the harsh but much needed truth. If the dad throws away his pride and asks for help, that is when they would have a chance at getting money and actually supporting their children. He can borrow money, and that is the only way that we can actually solve anything. They've also talked about how some people don't want to tell other people about their cancer, but truly, in which situation did this ease the pain any less than if they told them? They'd feel that they didn't spend enough time with their loved one, or they just left them. Hiding this info does more harm than good, and none of their points on this stand because they're just it doesn't prove that it's a lot more beneficial than if they just straight up told them. Our opponents keep talking about berating them, but we have already mentioned that although the information may be harsh, the language that we talk about through it doesn't have to be. Now I'll be moving on to adding more onto our points. So the only way to build a long-term healthy relationship is to have radical honesty. The only way of knowing people on a deeper level is this is the only way to actually know people on a deeper level, their likes and dislikes. They aren't hiding a part of themselves from the other person. This prevents misunderstandings and allows more communication to happen. A relationship only becomes strong when both sides are honest and comfortable about being truthful. I'll take that POI.
Would you tell your kid that their artwork sucks when they think it's great?
I wouldn't tell them that their artwork sucks, but I say that I really appreciate their effort, but they could improve on this or that. But like I would only do that if I'm in a position where I'm able to give this feedback, so that point doesn't stand. A relationship built on lies is bound to collapse one way or another. Let me help you visualize the issue caused by silence. It's telling your friends your boundaries about what they can or can't do. It looks like telling them that you aren't comfortable with how they act or how they do this and that. This allows room for communication to happen compared to how in some relationships, only on our side will we have genuine consent, because withholding the truth will cause someone to believe something else is to believe something else that is still a lie. Withholding truth manipulates partners into staying under false assumptions. This looks like a person knowing that they never want children, but avoids ever telling their partner because they fear that their partner might leave. The partner stays in the relationship believing that they are building toward a family together. This is wrong because the partner is making life decisions, time, emotional investment, future planning based on information that is incomplete. Consent to the relationship is not informed. This could also look like someone saying how everything is fine to avoid conflict, causing the other side to actually believe everything is well and stable when in reality you are unhappy in the relationship. This looks like someone hiding the fact that they cheated because it would only hurt their partner, and the list goes on. This looks like this withholding the truth doesn't protect your partner or anyone in the relationship. It protects your comfort while denying them the right to choose. It's a lot better to share your viewpoints rather than keeping it to yourself, bottling your emotions until one day they in the end explode when your family, your friends, or your lover, they don't even know what they did wrong. We need radical honesty in order to ensure that everyone is happy in the relationship. As my partner already mentioned, we can simply tell the other person we don't like a certain gift until instead of them thinking that you actually like it and buying it for you again and again. Just telling them straight on prevents waste of money, energy, and time for something that you don't even like. Having radical honesty gets small misunderstandings out of the way without harming anyone. Small lies accumulate and explode later. Radical honesty allows both sides to understand the issue before it becomes big and toxic. Even if sometimes people feel pain or sadness for a short time due to the truth, it's a lot better than being faced with the fact that everything in the relationship was built solely on lies, creating a very impactful long-term damage that may never be fixed. This could be not telling your family that you actually want to be an artist because they've worked so hard for you and they paid so much money for your tuition to try and get you a high-paying job, but so that you could be like a doctor or a lawyer. But because you don't want to destroy their dreams and hurt their feelings, you stay silent about it later on, leading to you getting a job that you don't even like, while your family still believes that they're doing their best to support you. When you don't communicate with them, you don't know if they'll accept you or not. But the fact is, if you communicate, that's you tried, and there's a chance of them understanding and them supporting you. While on their side, they just choose to leave everyone out of in the dark and choosing to withhold all of the information. I'll take some POIs in 3, 2, 1. Okay, so only when both sides are honest and they openly communicate can they move to a better future and make improvements. Honesty is the foundation of all relationships. So we believe that if this relationship is built on lies, whether it's about what you want to do in the future, about your identity, about you being trans, or about how your financial situation is, all of that could have a chance at being solved if you're honest. While on their side, if you just choose to withhold this information, there's no chance at this ever being solved. So our only they don't have an actual impact for their argument, while we can ensure that something happens, even if the other side doesn't accept us or accept our viewpoints. At least we have a chance of them accepting and actually fixing the issue, like putting food on the table or working through this issue together, while they just choose to ignore the issue and believe that ignorance will solve all their issues, when in reality all this is doing is destroying the relationships destroying the relationships they have and having a relationship built upon lies. Thank you.
I think at first we've already told you how the question is not whether you should be honest in a relationship generally. It is whether you should be brutally honest in every single scenario, which is why I think the opposition is incredibly uncharitable when they start cherry picking. For example, saying that like, oh, perhaps like in this scenario, like you wouldn't tell your partner you're cheating because you don't want to hurt their feelings. I think that's just not fair to say. Like, I don't think it's uncharitable for us to also push for honesty generally in relationships, because most times honesty is needed for a relationship, right? If you're not honest with them, can you really trust them if you don't even know like half of what they're saying is true? But the burden of opposition is incredibly high, which is not the same for us, which it makes it so that we can still say, if you're cheating, well, then maybe you should preserve your morals as well and be able to be clean with your partner and tell them, since you're actively harming them by doing so. I think every relationship built on lies is bad. It doesn't mean that a relationship that has a lie is automatically bad. So what have we told you? First of all, on like brutal honesty just isn't helpful, right? I think white lies are necessary. I think white lies do two things that are incredibly valuable. I'm going to break it down for you. First of all, they show kindness and the fact that you want them to be happy. And the second is you reassure and support your friend when they're doubting themselves. Because I think the reality is most people are good at forming judgments, right? I think if you wear a dress, right, it's because you yourself think it looks good, because you already formed the judgment on it. However, when you do ask your friend, like, does this look good on me? It's not really you're asking them for judgment on whether it's good or bad, because you've already formed on yourself. You're more actually looking for reassurance because you're feeling doubtful, and that's why white lies are really helpful. The second, what does opposition say? They tell you white lies actually cause long-term damage, and they proceed to never explain why. Whereas I've already explained to you, either there are two scenarios, right? If you tell a white lie, which is like you look pretty in this dress, even if you don't think so, they either you suck at lying, right, and they catch you. So basically, they see you that you're lying, and they know, but then they realize you're being nice. Why else would you say they look nice in a dress that you don't actually think so, and they know you're lying? Well, they probably can tell that you're being nice. For example, if your grandma always tells you you look beautiful, you probably know that like your grandma's biased and stuff. You still feel happy. You love your grandma when she says that, right? Second thing is just they don't realize. So you feel happier, right? If you don't realize they're lying and you're like, oh, I look really nice in this dress, then you just feel better. Like there's literally no harm to this, right? The second thing they tell you is that a relationship's break up over the truth. That break up over the truth weren't healthy anyway. As in, like, there shouldn't ever be a bad scenario to telling the truth. Because if they couldn't handle the truth, that relationship wasn't healthy. That's pretty black and white. And I don't think opposition is being charitable either, because they just don't consider many other examples which that we think this definitely applies. That like perhaps it doesn't immediately break up the relationship, but it obviously isn't helpful towards it. For example, sometimes the truth just isn't helpful to sit down and tell your child like why your mom and dad aren't seeing each other often. It's probably just easier to say your mom's very busy instead of delving into messy divorces, right? Also, it just means that like maybe yourself, even if like this doesn't lead to any harm within the relationship by telling them the truth, you yourself just perhaps feel better if you know that like everything that you think isn't out there, that like even if you weren't going to receive judgment, at least to yourself, you're not telling yourself bad things like, oh, I actually got judged. Like maybe they didn't tell me, but they're judging me behind their back and you don't know that. Maybe that is just a far better to just be able to have that defense mechanism to yourself, right? Which is our second push, right, under this, in which we tell you it means you avoid unnecessary emotional burden. Sometimes it's just not necessary or helpful to share things. For example, telling an old dying man about his cancer or the reality of a kid's artwork and just shooting it down and saying like it looks bad, when in reality there is no point in critiquing a kid's artwork. Like, sure, I get how opposition try to say like you can frame it really nice and considerately, like, oh, I appreciate the effort and stuff like that, but it's not really helpful in this sense, because a kid is obviously not trying to be like an artist. He's just trying to impress you, and obviously it's far better to just grant that and then just say like, oh, it looks really good. All right, I'll take that PR.
You say honesty creates emotional burden, but isn't it true that the real emotional burden comes from decades of hidden truth, mistrust, and simmering resentment, not a short conversation? Yet if you protect feelings now by lying, aren't you just creating inevitable pain?
Okay, so we've got to engage with the examples I provided in which this is relevant, because I'm not saying that every single white lie is like, protecting like them from emotional burden. No, that's not true. But what I'm saying in that particular examples in which you shouldn't have to tell them the truth, which is just far better when you don't have to tell them the truth. I don't think you have to force me to say that it applies to every single scenario. No, because in the scenarios in which I've provided, in which I like say, oh, you're dealing with a divorce and you don't want to have to explain to the kid in every single detail, in which that a child come here after working at school day all day to create like a mother's card and stuff like that and create a flower to it, you should just say it would be far better to encourage a child and say it's like really pretty and say even if you don't. Okay. So thirdly, they tell you emotional guesswork leads to understanding, and they just don't mechanize this at all, which I've already told you how, and they just label it as mixed signals. When I've explained that their first point, in which you either catch them in the lying and you appreciate it, or you don't, in which you feel happier, right? And finally, they tell you early conversations makes problems easier to solve. I think it can also just mean you're not ready to have a conversation, in which, for example, you're a trans person in a conservative family, and you just don't even understand your own feelings yet. It's really hard for you to explain it, which is why when they tell you, oh, some people might not never feel ready for this conversation, I don't think it's far worse to rush them and make it so that they have to talk about it earlier than later, so because they can have that time to understand their own feelings, to express that easier, to more likely create less misunderstandings. All right. So on to our second push, in which we tell you lying is a necessary defense mechanism, in which we tell you it corrupts one of the core systems to building a relationship, which is that you like build up in trust in how much you confide to them. You aren't initially best friends, right? You progress. Should be fine to not have to share everything to a regular friend, which is just a normal like platonic relationship, but isn't so trusting as well. But often they just don't want to talk about the feelings because they haven't understood for themselves. For example, the sexuality or just a sensitive subject. I think people need to lie to protect their emotions inherently as well. And I think it also just involves fear of judgment, in which inherently like people often fear judgment, even if there wasn't going to be judgment initially, and that is like perfectly natural. All right. So on the rebuttal to this, opposition talk about how like some people just ignoring keeping people in bark doesn't solve this issue. For example, when a father's struggling with money, perhaps they don't want to share with their children and worry them about this when it's meaningless, since they can't really make money themselves. And I think this is just like true. I think borrowing money, like when they provide options like, oh, you could tell everyone and just borrow money to fix the issue, I think it doesn't involve like having to burn other people with that type of like worry, right? Borrowing money doesn't require telling them, like solving that problem. They can't really help you in this scenario, so there's no point in burdening them with the truth. All right. So on to my final extension, in which I tell you that there just exists a right to privacy, as in there is a need for personal boundaries. Relationships often hinge on respecting personal boundaries. I think radical honesty is done really badly in relationships, as it's often interpreted wrongly as offensive or rude, and it creates an unhealthy expectation to share everything. It means that actually it makes you mistrust the other person when they withhold even the slightest of any information, even if it is for your own good, which is why we can burn and push this high. As in, even the unnecessary emotional burn things, when you don't share them, it creates mistrust in this relationship, simply because you've bred such an unhealthy expectation. I think trust is actually based on the fact that you don't need to share everything. You trust them. That is inherently the idea of trust, that you don't have to tell them every single thing that you're thinking. And finally, we just tell you that self-guilt, that still creates an unfounded self-guilt, which is really unnecessary. It makes you feel horrible when withholding info that is even for their own good. In those scenarios in which we tell you that, like, even then, that is for their own emotional burden, in which we can cherry pick these scenarios because we've shown how this burden is raised because of this unhealthy expectation. And that's why we clearly this fair.
For side opposition to argue that truth is dangerous, that people are fragile, and that relationships need silence to survive. Because we think that this debate is not about being cruel. It is about whether truth or concealment should be the foundation of intimate relationship. Very, very proud to propose. Three things in the speech then. First, some reframing. Secondly, some clash analysis. But thirdly, some weighing, right? Now, firstly, reframing. I think the question in this debate simply is not, does honest hurt? Because I think what opposition sides ask is, does honest cause pain? Of course it does. Like, obviously, when you tell like your child that is like that their artwork is not like the best in the world, obviously it hurts their child, right? However, I think the real question in this debate then should be, does honest cause more harm over time, right? Because I think pain from honesty is short-term, it is specific, it is manageable, just like what we told you down the bench. However, I think pain from dishonesty then is delayed, it is compound, and it is explosive, just as what my first speaker and sixth speaker have told you multiple times, right? So I think honesty is simply like setting a bone, right? Because I think it is actually painful in the moment, but I think it is necessary for proper healing. Dishonesty is like letting it heal crooked because it hurts less today. Now, second framing then, about how trust actually requires informations, not intentions. Because I think what opposition assumes is if my intention is good, hiding the truth is acceptable. But truth is not built on intentions. It is built on access to reality. When partners withhold information, the other person cannot make informed choices, consents become incomplete, and power becomes unequal. But thus, I think a relationship without honesty is simply like signing a contract with missing pages. Consent exists only on paper, not in the practice. Third, for reframing then, about strong relationships are not fragile. Because I think what opposition side frames honesty as is something that breaks relationship. But if a relationship collapsed under truth, it was never stable in the first place. It was propped up by ignorance. Thus, I think this simply means that all of their arguments about this kind of thing breaking all of this kind of relationship simply wasn't true, right? Now first clash then about radical honesty is cruel and unnecessary, right? They argue that radical honesty causes unnecessary emotional harms and that white lies are kinder, right? What do we tell you? First, that radical honesty does not equal to brutal honesty. The radical honesty is truthful, it is intentional, it considers timing and delivery. Cruelty is a choice, it's not a requirement. Secondly, white lies are not harmless. They delay conflict, they create false expectations to deepen betrayal when exposed. Being lied to is often more painful than the truth itself. Yes, radical honesty can be uncomfortable. Hearing truth we don't want to hear hurts in the short term. We're not denying emotional reactions. Emotions matter. The key question is about whether short-term discomfort versus long-term harm. Emotional burden from dishonesty is finite. You feel it, you process it, and move forward. Emotional burden from dishonesty then is compound over time. Hidden truth breeds mistrust, resentment, confusion, and emotional explosions, right? If emotional burden is side opposition's concern, then I think radical honesty simply reduces long-term emotional load. People stop carrying secret worries about lies, suspicions, or unspoken language, and I think relations simply stop being quietly toxic and start being open, fair, and manageable, right? And I think this simply looks like when you forgot to do your homework. If you don't tell your parents, you're going to definitely be burdened, right? You're going to be worried if they actually might find out that you forgot to do it, or if they actually find out and I don't know, give you some punishment, right? However, I think on our side of the house, when we actually tell your parents the truth, I think your burden will actually be better released, given the fact that you only need to hold this kind of pain, you only need to hold this kind of pressure for a limited amount of time, right? But secondly, we also want to emphasize to you about when side opposition told you multiple times about this one example about if your child asks you if their artwork is good or not, and then whatever. Firstly, I think you simply don't need to criticize this, right? What you can do is you can ask him, you can tell him or her about how this artwork is much better than the one that you painted before. This artwork is actually much better maybe than one of your her classmates' art. You can also tell her that you're not a professional artist, so obviously your artwork is not perfect, right? All of these things actually expresses your real and honest, I guess, impression or your honest feelings in a positive way, right? In a positive way. So I think at the end of this clash, radical honesty may create a brief emotional burden, but silence and lies create a lifetime of emotional depth. The real harm is in hiding, not in telling the truth, right? Now, why do we think that our side's characterization of all of these harms are simply much more likely than theirs, right? Firstly, I think obviously when somebody is actually being dishonest to, when somebody is actually being lied to, I think obviously they're gonna build suspicion to everything else that dude is actually telling them, right? Because obviously you're less likely to trust somebody who have lied to you multiple times, or even in a good way, compared to when somebody who have never actually lied to you, right? Especially in these really important cases, right? So I think that simply means that this kind of untrust is really, really likely to happen on side opposition. And I think the only harm that I think side oppositions were able to prove on our side of the house was that little short-term moment of uncomfortable. It's only that little short-term moment of awkwardness, and I think this is something that is really easy to overcome compared with their long-term harm that I think is really, really hard to overcome, which we told you down the bench, right? Second clash then about how honesty makes relationship unstable, right? And I think what opposition tells you is they claim how constant honesty leads to conflict and breakups. However, we tell you that conflict is not instability. Unresolved conflict is, right? Because we told you multiple times about how radical honesty surfaces issues earlier. It allows small corrections, right? Opposition's model creates relationship that looks calm but are actually emotionally loaded, right? But third clash really quickly about some truths are actually better left unsaid, right? What they tell you is they agree that certain feelings or thoughts don't actually need to be shared. We told you that withholding the truth removes agency, manipulates outcomes, and prioritizes comfort over consent. Yet if a truth affects commitment, trust, and boundaries, I think that is actually what we were supposed to do, right? Conclusion is really simple because we told you when we were able to tell you down the bench that the entire foundation, the entire foundation of building like a good relationship is the sense of trust. And when we told you that this kind of trust is actually really easily broken up on their side of the house, we think that our side of the house simply provides a much better relationship, recreates a much better environment. Thus, this is the clearest proposition ballot ever.
I think government gives us some really great examples of when you should be honest in a relationship. We agree that you should admit to cheating. We agree that you should tell your partner when you no longer feel a spark. That is not enough to fulfill government's burden within this debate. I don't think they fully understand what the burden is in this debate, because like the topic itself is that this house supports radical honesty in relationships. I think that honesty is important in all relationships. We are willing to accept the examples that opposition gives us. They are not willing to accept ours. I think before I go into the depth, I think if you look at the big picture of this debate, government's push has just been the big life altering stuff of confessing to cheating, of admitting some truths that are quite serious. We agree that you should admit those truths in those scenarios. We think that it is important to let the small things slide. Telling your child that their artwork is great. Loving someone in a healthy relationship is reassuring them that everything will be okay, when they're panicking, that their art is good when no one else thinks so, or telling them that they look beautiful in that dress when they spent the afternoon shopping, but it doesn't actually look good on them. That is what a healthy relationship looks like. It's leaving the small things out and letting them have their moment and making them feel good about themselves. That is something that we are willing to defend, that government is not. That is why we are able to win this debate. So 2 overall themes. Firstly, is brutal honesty all the time helpful? And secondly, is lying necessary to escape oppressive situations? Note that either one is able to get us the win if we are able to prove it, because of government's burden to defend brutal honesty in all situations, in all relationships. I think under the first theme, the opposition has 2 broad pushes, and that is to say that that these relationships that are built on lies are just very unsustainable and should have been broken up anyway. They give the example of getting a gift from your partner that you didn't like. I'm not sure how many relationships opposition has been in, but if my girlfriend gets me a gift and I don't particularly like it, but she spent her whole afternoon shopping for it, she thought it was a great gift for me, I'm not going to tell her to her face that this is not a good gift. You should have gotten me something else, right? That's extremely toxic in a relationship, because by telling her that truth, you just negate her feelings. By telling her that truth, you are undermining her stake in this relationship, and that's extremely toxic. You should just lie and say that you think that it is a great gift, and that is what being in a relationship is about. It's about supporting each other, even when it is not necessarily true. I think opposition also has
Yuan,
some other. I'll accept the point.
if you dislike something that your partner spent so much time on, even if you don't say it, wouldn't you agree that the relationship was toxic to begin with?
Absolutely not. I think if my partner thinks that I love debating and she gets me something debating related, but I didn't really want something debating related, I don't think that it's a toxic relationship that she got me something debating related, right? It means that she understands that I love debating. I didn't really want something like a debating related gift. But me accepting that debating related gift and saying, "Oh, this is so good, thank you," is me supporting her stake in the relationship. It's me saying I support. That is what being in a relationship is about. I think opposition also under this kind of sub theme pushes the fact that there is long-term damage to a relationship if you do lie. I think that this is extremely untrue. First of all, I think I thought when I first met our second speaker, I thought he was annoying at first, but now we're quite close. I think people change. I think situations change. I think ignoring the small issues and letting them slide and giving someone the benefit of the doubt and taking their positives is what you should do in a relationship, because there's this thing called trust, and it's essential to a relationship. I think that is something the opposition is just doesn't defend. I think that the second sub theme of the first theme is just that opposition's push on like there's fewer misunderstanding, there's less emotional guesswork. I think whilst it's true that if you are direct, there is less misunderstanding, we are willing to concede that. But I don't think that this like the fact that you don't misunderstand in opposition's world is not a trade-off that is just worth it at all. Because if you just tell someone that their drawing is horrible or you don't like their gift at all, like sure they don't misunderstand it, but it is so emotionally damaging to them that that it is willing to let that misunderstanding slide, that you should support that misunderstanding because they feel valued and they feel valued as a human being, that like opposition just doesn't provide that. I think also like they say that like you cannot consent, it's incomplete consent. I think that this is just not true at all. I think that people can still consent to relationships even if they don't know the full picture. Like I think people consent to relationships because they feel supported, because they feel like this person really cares about them, that this person values them as a human being. I think that is what people consent to when they're in a relationship. When you tell them to their face that you don't like something about them, and you are so direct and like you're so direct about it, as says in the info slide, that you like you don't hold back any harsh feelings, that is when they are unable to consent to the relationship, because that is not what they signed up for. They are not supported. They're no longer supported, and that is extremely harmful. I think that is when you get incomplete consent only in the government's world. I think like third app has one final like push about like, oh, you drag like lies kind of drag on, but you can just get it over off with quickly. I think that this is not like these are not the two options. Yes, you can leave it, or like you can leave it or you can get it over with, but leaving it doesn't have like this big emotional burden that that app is trying to push. Like you can just leave it and get it. Like if someone gets you a gift and you don't like it and you leave it, they feel really good about themselves because they felt that their gift was really good for you. But if you like confront them, what do you gain from that? I just don't understand. So I think at the overall end of this clash, like brutal honesty all the time is not helpful. Government does not defend their burden of justifying every single scenario in a relationship, and like being honest is good in all of them. I think it's important to remember that opposition agrees that you should be honest for the big things, that you should admit to cheating, that you should like admit to these things that the government also agrees with. But there are just some scenarios that you need to lie, in which you make the other person feel like a real human being, that they feel valued in that relationship. That is extremely harmful. We win this theme, and therefore we should win the debate outright. Second theme is just like, is lying necessary to escape oppressive situations? I think that if this is an international debate, this is an international competition. I think in, for example, the Middle East, where these regimes like Iran are extremely oppressive against the LGBTQ community, are you going to come out to your father? Are you going to come out to your family who have close ties with the regime? No, you have to lie and you have to like protect yourself. And like opposition just again does not feel these burdens in like in just like justifying that you should like lie, even when it is like for sure that your family or whoever you're coming out to will not support you. For this reason, we win the second theme as well. Never be prouder to negate. Thank you.
Gov's fatal mistake is treating the truth as automatically moral in this debate. That without truth without care in relationships is harmful. We have proved that morality in relationships depends on timing, depends on intention, and depends on the power dynamics of a relationship, not whether you're truthful 100% of the time. Government has never explained why unfiltered truth is morally superior to compassionate restraint. Whereas you tell your partner they look good in that blouse when you secretly think that that blouse is a horrible shade of purple and that you dislike purple a lot. Maybe that it's their favorite color, and maybe you tell them that it is good. Is that necessarily morally wrong? No, it is not. And that is what government has completely blindsided. They have assumed that the truth is automatically moral when it is not. Not every lie is good, as not every truth is. We have two worlds that come up in this debate. Government's world, whereby we see less emotional safety and more fractions and more anxious relationships. Whereas under our side, we see an honest communication guided by care, emotional process before disclosure, and the long-term trust and stability where people open up to each other eventually and after periods of time when they've processed their own feelings and they feel they can. Not just blanketly lying them on people and giving them that burden when they don't feel ready. We don't oppose the truth. We oppose the idea that saying everything is more important, that the truth is more important than protecting the people we love. So the trade-off in this debate is, for example, that two individuals who love each other don't tell the truth 100% of the time, in order for your depressed wife struggling with postpartum depression having the choice, and you having the choice, to be able to make herself feel good about herself, to be able to tell her that she looks good in a dress, even if she doesn't, to be able to be that, support her, be her rock, and to be able to motivate her out of her depression, and to be able to care for your partner. When you tell your partner that's in a bad mental state that, oh, I don't like that blouse on you, I don't like that dress on you, I think you look ugly today, that will not help anyone. That is not good. If we are sacrificing the principle of truth within this, then what if we are sacrificing sacrificing compassion for the principle of truth, then what is to be made of relationships? If not us just telling everything we think, then where is the care? Where is the process? Relationships, and good and healthy relationships, come about when people process emotions, when people think about their feelings, and when people are able to tell them in a way which is compassionate, which is caring, and which is understanding. The blanket truth is harmful in many different ways, and that is not what is good in a relationship. That does not make it healthy. You can weaponize the truth. You can weaponize your point of view and make someone feel down. I'd like to say that if a tree falls down in a forest and nobody sees it, did it really fall? Insofar as this, if your partner does something that you don't like and you don't know about it, aren't you both still happy? The fact is, there is no inherent harm under our world, whereas in governments, there is almost infinite. Again, this debate isn't about whether the truth is good or bad, but whether you should protect the people that you love and in which way that you can do this more successfully. I believe that our side has proved that you protect the people that you love way more by providing compassion, by caring, and by thoughtfully processing your emotions, whilst also being able to spare the burden of people. For example, the continuous example that has come up of the mother dying with cancer, or the woman with postpartum depression, or the father struggling to make ends meet. The fact is, it isn't about just whether a relationship is healthy or not by telling the truth, but it is about whether you take the time to care, consider, and to think about the other person's feelings, as opposed to just blanketly lying the truth on them. I'm so proud to oppose.
In this reply, I will do two things. Firstly, just analyze how we won the two main clashes in this debate, and secondly, weigh both sides' cases even in their best case scenario. So firstly on the clashes. Firstly, what is the premise for a healthy relationship? The premise is accepting the other for who they are, or what they want and what they think. And if they do ultimately reject you, that's actually beneficial because that means you understand that relationships is unhealthy and you shouldn't stay there. I believe that what Op is doing is saying that, for example, if you're a mother who's going to die of cancer, should tell your children that you're totally fine, even when you're throwing up every day, visiting the hospital every week, confusing your children further. We think that if you do tell your children you are gonna die, will make them cherish their time with you instead of heavily making them regret it when their mom does ultimately pass away. That sort of harm is irreversible. Now, secondly, which case creates the more beneficial future for the relationship? I think a really weird mistake that opposition has made is assuming that you can't tell the truth while still being considerate of the other side. The only response that I gave to your argument about how there's going to be contradiction in action and words is simply by avoiding it and only focusing on the short-term benefits. Essentially, they're simply forgetting our characterization that communication includes both a part of an opinion and a part of a fact. You can give the harsh reality, which is the truth, and if there's nothing positive in your opinion, such as not appreciating them for their effort into picking a gift, it wasn't a healthy relationship to begin with. So now, moving on to some of the weighing. Judge, I would like to first point out what a clear misconception on opposition. Now, the first speaker has given us this point about how it doesn't really matter about those small things. You can still, for example, tell your friend that, oh, this dress doesn't look that bad, doesn't look really good on you, stuff like that. And but still, you should lie about those super big and ugly scenarios where there was quite an opposite push from their whip, saying that it is the small things that matter more and that they don't need to prove their burden in these big cases, which is simply confusing for this debate to go on. Now, to finally weigh this debate about how even under the circumstance in our worst case scenario that the truth is ugly and communicating is brutal, we are exchanging these uncomfortable moments for long-term success. And honestly, our web proves why And honestly, our whips proves why that this can sometimes be beneficial too, because these uncomfortable moments can test your strength. Now, let's move on to opposition side's case then. They're exchanging this short-term benefit and this emotional comfort into long-term harms. We believe that all down the bench, from our first speech to our whip speech, we have said again and again until how even if your wife suffers from postpartum stress, we believe that it is simply better to give them this emotional preparation first before they going back to normal life and being and having to receive this judgment from other people and giving them these mixed emotions that will make them think that you don't believe or trust them more. Therefore, we believe that we are focusing on the long term, which is going to outweigh what opposition is trying to prove in this debate. And so therefore, we believe that we have taken this debate. Thank you.